Awesome. Well, good morning to everybody. Hope everybody's doing okay. Hope all the listeners are doing okay. Huge shout out to the Bug Crowd crew, and as always, huge appreciation for being invited to go do this. The talk is kind of going to be a fun one. It's a little technical, but it's a lot of taking a look at what are we up to, what are we doing, how is the industry going, and actually, quite honestly, how do we start looking to change a lot of how we focus in the industry. So as it says, we reap what we have sown. Part of the logic behind that is quite simply, we have been at this for, 20, 30 plus years, some of us, unfortunately, and we have taken a bit of a step back and gone, what the heck is going on? What have we created? And how do we change it? So without further ado, let's have a little bit of the agenda. Obviously, we're going to take a look at why we're broken, what the logic is on this whole broken thing. And we'll go through, obviously, passwords, history, education, the do no harm idea, which I want to really have a bit of a talk about. How do we address going forward? And then obviously the blinky stuff. And then scattered throughout all of this, there'll be hacking of ships and a few other things that we're going to have some fun. So brief intro for those of you that do or don't know me or wonder what the hell the bearded hairy thing is. For those of you that probably know me, I've been in this industry way more years than I get to think of. I've managed to break Nigeria, space station, Mars rover, apparently an airplane or two, train, ships, and a few other things. I am now with Ativo. The official stuff will be coming out next week, and I'm not going to say much more than that because there's some official shenanigans, and quite honestly, part of it is back to that whole look. We need to look at something else other than reactive, and quite honestly, because we need to change the symmetry to a more asymmetrical defense rather than leaping over tall buildings in red suits claiming that we can break everything, which we know we can. What else are we running on? We are messing around with humans, consciousness, still computing, and shipping. The human stuff I'll talk a little bit about, the consciousness stuff and a few other things. Part of it is because I'm very fortunate I get to throw the crystal ball out and take a look at where we're going, what we're doing, and how we're doing it. Part of it is obviously because, we keep looking at the future, and honestly, it's probably not scary enough than it really actually is. And the other one is after you get to make planes go sideways, and see if we can make ships roll over. And for those of you that know me, and we talked to RSA and stuff like that, I have a bit of a whiskey collection. Yes, it will be coming with me to RSA, Black Hats, Burcon, Gurcon, and a few other places. So without further ado, let's make it quite simple. We are broken. We are not in a good place, I would argue, at this precise moment in time, and we haven't been for a while, and it's becoming more and more apparent. And I think part of the challenge is because really this is what we've been doing for the last 20 plus years. As an industry, we have, unfortunately, had to make the shit up as we've gone along. You go back 20 plus years ago and networking was new, systems were new, configs were new, architectures were new, and that mentality hasn't changed. We don't have the history that other industries have. We don't have, the accounting history, the leadership history. We don't have the history in manufacturing of several hundred years worth of understanding how things work. We are literally, as it says here, making shit up as we go along. And for good or for bad, we've done an amazing job of doing this, because basically you look at what we're spending this coming year, and we're going to be exceeding $124 billion industry. That's huge. And it keeps going up. I think this past year, 2018, we were at 110, 114 billion. Previous to that, it's going up 10% year on year. And this is a challenge because it's like, okay, people, organizations, industry is giving us this money. And yes, admittedly, probably a good 50% of that is just to keep the lights on as far as information security goes. But there's a lot of this money that is going into the future spending, looking at the industry as to where it's going to be. We have the large conferences where everybody turns up and tens of thousands of people go through the vendor booths, and everybody's like, oh, this is amazing tech that's coming. This is great stuff that's happening. We have hundreds of companies trying to sell you, password security and all sorts of other stuff that might or might not have any implications with AI, ML, or whatever acronym that they want to use this year. We have a conversation on buzzword bingo in a minute. But we are having this amount of money coming in, and part of the problem and part of my biggest issue with this is what's leaving our industry. Top left-hand side is obviously from privacyrights.org, which is, does a marvelous job of maintaining a decent database. Middle one down is actually from Computer Business Review. That was in the middle of 2018. And the bottom one, which is the bottom right-hand side, is actually straight out of one of Experian's reports. You look at the amount of data that we have lost. And it's we, because it's not just us and it's not just the business. We have all lost. We are the guardians. We are the custodians. We have the charges that we are meant to be looking after. And unfortunately, we're not arguably doing a very good job of it. I mean, you look at the term 2018 top 10 hacks, you got everything. You got 2.5 billion just in the top 10 hacks there, for goodness sakes, of identities, information, credit cards, and data that's actually just leaving. So obviously the question becomes a very, very simple one. What the hell are we spending $124 billion on? What are we doing? And are we doing it right? And if not, what in hell's name are we actually having to do about this stuff? So did a little bit of research. 386 conferences. There's a website out there. There's one of the sites maintains an entire list of conferences out there. And I dumped the entire site, did a quick download, did a quick sort on it, and I came up with 386. I don't think that's a full list. In fact, probably somebody online will be able to quote and say there's even more conferences. But this is the challenge. We have grown as an industry over the last X number of years. You know, it doesn't matter whether you want to call it 20, 30, whatever years, to such a point where we have literally a conference every day, if not more than a couple of conferences every single blasted day. And unfortunately, at those conferences, this is what we're faced with. We are faced with organizations that say that they can keep us safe, that they can keep everything secure, that it's 100% secure, that the anti-hacking software is working and anti-hacking for Windows and everything else. This is, you know, obviously for those of you that know me, the top left-hand hooded one, the out-of-work Nazgul, and the bottom right-hand out-of-work Nazgul one absolutely annoy the living snot out of me. And blaming hackers as opposed to blaming criminals as well in a minute. But this is our own, is us. This is the people that we work with. These are the companies that we interview with, the companies that we try to do business with. These are the people that are unfortunately standing up at these conferences and going, hey, we can solve your problem. And arguably, $124 billion later, you know, $8+ billion breaches worth of, you know, intelligence and information going later, we're lying. We don't have the ability to solve that problem. So a quick reminder for those of you that are here from a business standpoint or from a marketing standpoint, as nice as I can put it, we need to change the paradigm. You know, it's quite nice. Me personally, I like my squirrels. For those of you that follow me every now and again, you'll see squirrels coming up in my presentations fairly regularly. Top right-hand side was actually taken at a conference fairly recently of basically people who consider themselves hackers. Guess what? We're normal people. And unfortunately, this is how the media perceives us. So, as nice as I can put it, if you are listening from one of those companies that likes to use hooded figures hiding behind bloody Matrix-style things, get the taser out and self-impose it upon yourself. Otherwise, I will find you and I will use it against you. So how do we fix this? How do we actually do something about this? How, as a leadership organization, can leaders, can industry, can we actually turn around and say, look, how do we actually sort, you know, the wood from the trees? How do we find the needle in the haystack? Take your pick on this one. And part of it, you know, there's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek in here, which is the top piece. You know, you take a look at the amount of vendors that are out there, 1,200 vendors, give or take a bit, that we expect to see this year in information security. You know, as nice as I can put it, quite a lot of them are sitting there with a whole bunch of blinky lights and not much else. You know, they maybe have got some investment money, they maybe have a good idea, which is great, but it's a blinky light and it's not going to fix the problem. The organizations that keep saying they're able to use intelligence, machine language that don't fully understand what that is, feel free to take the taser to them, please. Cattle prod the ones that keep saying they can use any kind of blockchain, cipher chain flipping, and SAIM intelligence system. It's tongue in cheek, but you get the idea. What's happened is we are being led by the nose, and we're being led by the nose by a lot of the marketing and the hype. In other words, how as an organization do I stand out among 1,200 people? And what's happening is we seem to be basically, rather than standing on our laurels and saying, hey, you know what, this is what we do and we do it properly and we know what we're up to, we're spending a lot more time standing there with the hype and spending a lot more time, unfortunately, not necessarily telling the truth in front of our customers. That shit's got to stop. The other big one for me is the reactive side of it. Guess what? We went past the firewall in the 90s. We haven't really looked back. Why are you buying a new one of the stupid things? Use the one you have, use it more effectively. And then the organizations that turn around and say, look, we've got a solution for everything. What I do recommend, when you sit there and you talk to organizations, how many of them are listening rather than doing the speaking? You know, there's a saying, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a bloody good reason. Well, try and actually do that with a vendor. How many of them are listening to you and the problem and the issues that you have, as opposed to trying to explain how their solution will shoehorn into your environment? Take a look at the organizations that focus on the outcome side of it, the metrics and the improvements. And the improvements for me are both the human side and the technical realms. You know, I know we're a very technology-focused type of industry, but unfortunately, at the core of it all are humans. And we have taken the humanity out of a lot of this, and we tend to forget that, or we try to remember that, you know, once a year telling a human not to actually do something, they're going to remember for the other 360 odd days. That isn't going to happen, as we know. The same thing, look for something proactive and predictive, for crying out loud. You know, we talked about the firewall world. Well, guess what? It's reactive. Start looking at the proactive solution. Start looking at something that's actually going to help the blue team, that's actually going to help the defensive strategy of the organization. Something that's actually going to change the paradigm from, you know, an attacker's perspective to an asymmetric defensive perspective. And look for solutions. You know, this is another one of those. I've got a couple of slides later on in this. We talk about, you know, flipping passwords, for goodness sakes. But for me, it's look at a solution. Don't look at something that's going to fix somebody else's problem. Look at something that gets to the core of the issues that we have. And there's some slides on that in a little bit, but there's some easy, simple stuff on here. We need to stop buying into the marketing hype. It's as simple as that. And worst case scenario, Mark Miller and I, last year, Mark Miller did this absolutely amazing Monopoly board for DevSecOps. It was absolutely fantastic. Go look for it online, hit him up online. He's an amazing guy, but we also put together this buzzword bingo. And there are 3 decks here, and I'm more than happy to hand out buzzword bingo cards to anybody that wants one, but 3 decks. And the more things you can tick off on the decks as you're talking to these organizations, the more I would run in the opposite direction. So some fairly simple stuff that's a little frustrating. All right, so 1,001 ways to remember the passwords. Let's have a conversation around this. Well, this is Band-Aids in motion. This is one of the things that frustrates the living heck out of me. We have dozens and dozens and dozens of companies trying to tell us that they have, oh, say again?
Sorry about that, keep going.
No problem. There are dozens and dozens of companies trying to tell us that they can fix all their problems and their passwords. We, this year, are planning on spending 10 billion or more on simply trying to add more Band-Aids to that password problem. And I think this is another one of those challenges. Like, look, there are simple ways to potentially solve this. There are ways to actually deal with this. We've been dealing with passwords since the 60s, for crying out loud, and we still haven't solved them. So this is something I'm working on at the moment. I've been working on it for about a year and a half, 2 years. And I've been working on it over the holidays and doing some more stuff on the holidays. But there are a couple of projects out there. One of them is actually using heart rate and some other interesting stuff inside the body cavity to understand your uniqueness and using that as an intelligent signature instead of using the password. But for me, it comes down to us as humans are unique. We have unique signatures in so many different ways. Why not actually use us as the authentication methodology? For what I've done is I've been working on using EEG monitors and pulling the EEG data out, dropping it across, obviously, Bluetooth and some other interesting stuff, and mapping out the brain so it understands that it recognizes my computer, my phone, a couple of other things, and then I can relay that to the computer The computer in turn recognizes a signature about who I am, and hey presto, no need for sorting passwords anymore. This is kind of it in a little bit more detail. Left-hand side is a map of my brain. I keep putting the same one up because I don't want to put a new one up because yeah, I just don't. Top right-hand side is actually a 3D map architecture of, I overlaid a few different ones on here. This is actually looking at the test computer, the phone, a module for one of the cards that I have, and something else I'm messing around with. The whole idea here is if I can get the computer and I to interact at this level, I can put an underlying signature in place, and hey presto, I become the unique authentication that allows me into my systems. No need to remember flipping passwords. Just the simple fact I can remember me, I can remember the password, I can remember my computer and a few other things. This is kind of where we get to. Is there risk to it? Absolutely. This is not a man in the middle, but this is a drill in the middle attack. So this is 2020 password management. I would not obviously recommend doing this. Neither would I recommend trying to use this for a USB installation. But this comes down to some of the core that we're talking about. We still put a band-aid over things as opposed to actually fixing the root problems. And this is the same stuff we're seeing. I've obviously, I'm fairly well known for messing around with transportation stuff. Anything, as it says, wings, wheels, tracks, tires, and fins. As researchers, many of us over the years have been shouting for the top of tallest buildings. As Renda, myself, there's so many of us out there that have been talking about this stuff. And unfortunately, the industries aren't necessarily still paying attention. So coming back into this field, doing a little bit more work in this field on the research side of the world. And yes, we are taking another poke around at airplanes. Why? Well, because they keep putting more and more of this darn data out there. Some interesting stats. As it says on the bottom, 100,000 sensors in wings on some of the more modern airplanes, 7 to 8 terabytes of data a day, 5,000 data points a second on an engine. It's absolutely amazing the quantity and the volume of data these things are actually dealing with. And the problem is, so much of it is not encrypted, so much of it is not secured, so much of it, if we as researchers took a look at it, we could actually help the industry if, unfortunately, they were willing to listen, which they not always are. So there's a nice thing to put it. Yes, we're going to go betting with the aeroplanes again. So this should be an interesting one. The other stuff we're messing around with is still obviously transportation and intermodal. Same thing, cars and lorries. Obviously, top left-hand side, you look at the interactivity between vehicles and the systems on board vehicles and the actual surroundings. So vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to pedestrian, vehicle to vehicle connectivity. We take a look at everything that's going on, not just with the engine, but all the personal data that we have. All of the apps. So many of these organizations are building application stores. And yes, some of them are actually taking a very proactive approach at it. Some of them still haven't quite got the shit together, as nice as I can put it. You can see the one with Keen where they took a look at a number of vehicles there and the amount of work and the amount of attacks they did. And I think, if I'm right in saying, Tesla was a couple of days ago, because it hit the news and went all over the darn place, started offering some fairly significant bug bounties for some of their work that they're doing. But it's, there's a good friend of mine and I messing around with some projects at the moment where we're looking at LiDAR, we're looking at what we can do with the infrastructure stuff, and unfortunately, it's still wide open. So, a lot of work to be done on that one. Lorries, I've done trucks in the US, I hate to say, but lorries in most of the rest of the world. A fair amount of work. I've been messing around with those things for the last couple of years as well, and looking at how they're implementing and architecting a whole bunch of, the follow each other mechanisms, some of the fuel saving mechanisms where they actually convoy and some interesting stuff there. There's some good stuff on there to mess around with. This is one I might have teased out at some crazy hour this morning. This is something I have been messing around with for about the last year and a half. This has actually been a lot of fun, and it's starting to come to a head because there are now a couple of companies. There's a good friend of mine, Leon, over in Singapore, is actually working on one. And there's a couple of other companies out there, Israel and the US, that are actually suddenly realizing, hey, we actually need to start to focus on shipping. So there's some interesting stuff. If you know where to look on the network, you can actually start scanning some of the SATCOM systems. You can, when they come into ship-to-shore systems, you can start scanning the networks. You can find nice, good open RDP servers on a bunch of them. And as it says, top right-hand side there is actually a nice copy of Windows 2000 server. This was taken middle of last year. So 6, 7 months old, maybe 7 or 8 months old. Bottom right-hand side, server 2003. User IDs and passwords to get into this are not hard, and unfortunately, half of the shipping companies have plastered them all over the bloody internet. So I'm not going to put them here because then you get yelled at, but you get the idea. This stuff is easy to find. And yes, this, oop, the heck happened there? Sorry, guys. Ha! Oh, God, I hate PowerPoint sometimes. Don't you just love it? Hang on a sec, guys. Let me, I managed to crash PowerPoint, or it managed to crash, depends on how you look at it.
Well, we get to see your wonderful beard for a couple seconds.
Oh, I hate computers. I do. You just love it when this stuff goes like this. All right, let's see if we can get this thing running again. All right, ready? Keep fingers crossed. If it crashes again, we're just going to do it. All right, let's see if we can get this thing running in this mode. All right, we got it back again?
Yeah, we can see it now, yeah.
Brilliant. All right, let's just run through this. You guys are going to get a whole bunch of crazy screens for a second. Oh, I have not had that crash on me for a while. That's been the first time in a while it decided to crash on me. Love computers. All right, shipping. Here we go. So we're back on this one. So yes, this is an interesting one. This was, oh gosh, middle of last year. We were doing some work for an organization and they're like, oh no, you can't do that. And I'm like, give me this about 20 minutes, half an hour. And so we actually managed to get from one of those previous screens into the shipping navigation system. From the shipping navigation system, we managed to get into one of the central systems, got a scan on the network. And this was obviously all done under a contract. Managed to get a scan onto the network, and then from the network managed to basically figure out where they actually had their maintenance modules and their ballast control modules. And the only reason these stupid things were actually hooked up together was because the vendor had been like, well, we need to monitor this stuff at sea and we need to be able to do this, and we're putting new systems in and new pumps in. So they basically just literally linked a couple of 100 foot of cable, jacked it into the two switches and said, this will be fine. And hey presto, we're sitting there basically looking at this thing and how we can make it roll over. This next one was awesome. So I was fortunate enough to be over in Istanbul earlier on this year, and I was stood by the side of an interesting neck of the woods there, and had a bloody great big antenna and a whole bunch of networking equipment early one morning, and started to do some analysis on the ships that were going through the strait. And after a fair amount of work, managed to figure out the frequencies and a few other things on the SATCOM systems. Also managed to figure out when they were running wireless on them. This was just 2 screen grabs from some of that work. So it's like, doesn't really take a lot of effort or a lot of anything more than a very determined person to actually figure out exactly how to get into some of this stuff. So again, from a researching standpoint, from our standpoint, this is our bread and butter. This is what we do. The challenges, as we always have had, is how do we effectively communicate this back to an industry that unfortunately hasn't wanted to listen. Obviously that's where BugCrowd comes in very, very effectively to help push those barriers down and help get industry talking. And when it works, it's absolutely effective and it's really, really good. So just, another one of those, hey, as we're researching this, as we're looking at this, it isn't just a matter of breaking it. We really have to understand how we actually fix this and how we actually make this work effectively. Yep, this is something we started working on several years ago. Keep messing around with it, keep going back to it, keep playing around with it, and keep seeing what we can do with it. Top left-hand screenshot is actually from a rail yard. The nice thing about it is they color code all of the different things coming in and out of the rail yard. If you get into the software, which is a fairly default user ID and password on this thing, you can start shifting all the carriages around on the train, which actually makes for good fun from our standpoint. Probably not so much when the wrong stuff turns up in the wrong part of the country. Oh yeah, I did leave the admin and password. Oh well, there you go. Have fun. Enjoy. The middle one is a GE locomotive. User ID, admin, password is a really complicated 6 zeros. That'll actually get you into the engine management control system of one of the GE trains. Bottom left-hand side is the electrologic switching gear, which, if you know the railway system, there's a little silver box anywhere from every junction all the way in the middle of nowhere to like every couple of miles along, and that will happily and merrily get you into the networking, the switching gear, And unfortunately, in the US, what they call positive train control, PTS, which is this whole new system that's meant to be really, really effective at stopping trains and has done nothing more than open up even more attacking holes. So yeah, not brilliant. And this, unfortunately, is where we are from a status there. We've researched it for a number of years. We've done a bunch of work with it, and nobody's really listening to it. There is, unfortunately, too much bureaucracy in place, and we don't have the ability to cut through it. So here is the question. Why can we still break everything? For that, I'm going to have a quick slurp of a cup of tea and go back and we'll take a look at our history. So, quick history lesson. This is what we tend to think of when we look at our industry. This is, us growing up through the industry, us basically working our way through the Bronze Age and all the other shenanigans, and we end up at the computer. Unfortunately, we're about as wrong as we possibly can be. This is a lot of our industry. This is a lot of the history. This is who we owe the thanks to. And it isn't the white male. It isn't the guy sitting there. As you might notice, there aren't too many gentlemen in this picture. The problem is we changed. We changed back in the 70s. We changed back in the 80s. We went into this whole male genius. The school started separating the security, the IT side of it and the computer sciences away from the other sciences. The advertising, the schooling, the gaming was all, unfortunately, targeted towards the boys. And then this crack happened. We decided that knowledge was power and that power needed to be controlled and managed. And we unfortunately created our own little self-centric interests. And we failed to share effectively. We also failed, as it says here, at balance. We failed to apply that knowledge effectively and carefully. We really thought that knowledge was power. I remember 15, 20 years ago doing the conferences and, how many people were like, oh, I have all this knowledge. And some people were happy to share it, but some people held that knowledge closely and tightly. And unfortunately, we're paying for it, and we still are paying for it. And this is the wonderful thing I love about the community, and especially about doing something like this, is it's like, hey, this is what I'm working on. This is what I've got going on. I want to share it, as do a lot of us. Please help us improve and please help us get better. But it needs all of us to be thinking. It needs all of us to take the knowledge and the actions we do and actually bring that one effectively. And quite honestly, it's going to take anybody who cares in this industry. And the care is really what it comes down to. This isn't just us basically, how do we break it? How do we do something? We really have to figure out how we fix the problem. And it isn't just the spots or the piecemeals. It isn't just us coming up and going, hey, I've got the latest and greatest hack on an application. It's okay, fundamentally, how do we change the way people approach the coding, the programming, the designing? How do we approach the way that people actually look at our industry, and how do we as an industry interact more effectively with the rest of the business, which we'll cover in a little bit. So let's talk about humans. Let's talk about us. Bottom right-hand side, Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. And arguably, that's us going off the edge of the cliff at high speed with the amount and quantity and availability of technology. We really don't fully understand it enough to actually, unfortunately, be let loose with the damn stuff. So quite simple. Do we educate or do we eradicate? And it's not necessarily just going to be our decision, which is going to make life interesting. So this is something we've been talking about quite a lot, but it's something I think we need to discuss over, we talked about it a lot last year. I did a lot of talks and a lot of conversations about fixing the basics, and we keep talking about it. But I basically, over the last year or so, I put this next set of slides together to say, okay, here is what we need to do. So let's talk about fixing the basics for a minute. And this is where we come into the human. This is where it's like, okay, this isn't a technology issue. This is a human issue. We spend so little time trying to fix the human, and yet we wonder why the human still breaks. When it comes down to an assessment or an audit, the control is in place to educate the human maybe once a year, or if you're lucky, twice a year, but that doesn't work. Why aren't we continually educating the human? Why aren't we continually talking to them and saying, hey, let me help you with this? I look at it from my standpoint. I have a couple of very, very large dogs. And no matter what they do, I will always come back to them and help them understand how to work in this world daily, hourly, for crying out loud. Why can't we take that time with the humans around us? You know, this is a simple thing. We have to fix the human. And part of it, and we'll touch on this in a little bit, is let's change the conversation. This isn't a security conversation anymore, especially with how technology and where technology is going and how we're interacting with it. This is a safety conversation. And how do we have that messaging reflect that this is a safety conversation, not a security conversation? So next one, back to basics. You know, you want to go out there and buy the next blinky light and you're going to install it onto your flat network. You need to be tasered. End of discussion. You're going to put it into the same warehouse that runs XP. You guys get the idea. You can read this faster than I can. The fact that we can still find RDP open on the internet, the fact that we can basically still get into a bloody SQL database, and the fact that we have still cross-site scripting at one of the top of the OWASPs, for goodness sakes, what in the hell's name is going on? Again, stop chasing the blinky shit and get back to the basics. This stuff isn't sexy. You will not win any awards for fixing cross-site scripting. But you will secure the environment. So take a step back and help organizations understand this. As it says, remove the easy ways in. This one, another one of those frustrations. You know, we talk about perimeter security. Companies are all out there saying, oh, we can secure your perimeter. Guess what? You don't freaking have one. There isn't such a thing anymore. The fact that you wake up in the morning and, you know, the first thing you go for is your phone at home, which is probably plugged in to the bloody Samsung fridge, which is watching you, and you start yelling for Alexa to turn the coffee machine on, you don't have a perimeter. And we have to understand that this is how industry is working, and there's more of it. I mean, there's, you know, 20, 30, 40 devices in every home these days. That's where your corporate network ends. And even then it doesn't, because obviously it goes into the wearable tech and the vehicles. So when companies say, hey, we can do a perimeter security, no, you can't. It's not there. Figure that shit out. Oh, and that's 2018. So I realized this is one of my older slides. I apologize. It should now be 2019's next generation crap, user behavior analytics, firewall stuff isn't going to fix the problem. We really have to change the focus. And quite honestly, the eyes on the inside of our world. You know, too often we go into forensic engagements and realize that companies don't have simple basic logging set up. So again, stop chasing all the fairy cake stuff, stop chasing the blinky lights, get the basics fixed. Good friend of mine, Phoenix, keeps on bashing on this one. Can't say I blame him. You know, there are what, 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 billion passwords out there now. And yet we still reuse the stupid things, and yet we still have 10 billion being spent. There are some simple stuff that we can do until either my EEG stuff works or some of this other stuff comes to pass. But the ability to use two-factor. Not all admins need to be admin, you know, all of this kind of good stuff on this one. Simple stuff. Again, it's education. And as it says, it's simple education and simple integration. This doesn't mean you have to go buy more toys. This means you have to sit down and go, fundamentally, how can I fix some of the basics? And this is probably one of the biggest ones. This week alone, a good friend of mine who runs an organization here in town just has basically been on the phone 3 times for 3 different companies that got themselves breached. And in 2 of the cases, they're like, yes, as opposed to, hey, we have an incident response plan. Step number 6 is to call you and your sorry ass. It's not there. So get a plan, the communication plan, the human plan, the practice plan. You guys get the idea, you know, OODA limp, NIST limp, take a pick, but quite simply get a plan. There is a set of arguments that are coming out now, and there's some interesting conversations around, you know, well, what will happen? Do we have Skynet? Do we have this? Do we have this? So I have my own kind of take on this, and the next 3 slides kind of go into this. This is really the best case scenario. You know, we end up with Hal, let's be honest, and then maybe and hopefully we get a nicer version of Hal, because Hal's going to wake up one day, look around at the human race, and is going to go, you guys are useless. You can't look after the planet. You keep killing each other. You don't look after the land that you live on. You sure as hell can't look after anything around you. Get out of the driving seat. We're going to take over. And if they do it nicely, in essence, we can kind of put our feet up and be the idiots, quite honestly. But sorry, I just got a text message from a good friend of mine. And I just had to giggle. Sorry, squirrel, good grief, squirrel moment. So anyway, this is one of those things that really, we're not good at looking after ourselves. So, this is obviously the best case scenario. Here is an interesting one. I started talking about this about a year or two ago, and a good friend of mine actually kind of came up with a really good system, which was like, hey, the system's going to wake up. And as it says on here, good old Kermit, I'm out of here. We do stand that chance that an intelligent system is going to look at us, realize that we do not have the ability to accept information from another source. In other words, we as humans revert back to our basic human nature, which is we have to experience before we learn. As kids, we grew up, we got told, don't touch the plate, don't touch the oven because it's hot, don't touch the kettle. What do? We touched the stupid thing and we got burnt, and we learned that way. And arguably as humans, we're at that point. We are staring into the precipice right now because of the amount of issues and tech that we have, but we don't seem able to learn unless we actually experience. So there is that argument that says an intelligent system is going to wake up and go, hey, I'll take you back from the precipice. And we're like, oh no, we're perfectly okay. And off we go tumbling. So at that point, if any intelligent system's got the intelligence, it's going to say, screw you and leave. Unfortunately, this is always the worst case scenario. And I really don't want Hollywood to be right. So let's try not to make this happen, please. This is one. So this is an interesting one. I have been... Jason and I stood up on stage in Tel Aviv last year, and we talked about this. Can do not harm? Can it work? And so let's take a quick look at this. What is it? Well, the simple thing is, given an existing problem, it may be better not to do something or even do nothing than to risk causing more harm than good. If you really, really think about it, it's the, observe, orientate, decide, and action. And it's that loop. And if you think about it logically, this is obviously to some degree the healthcare side, but can we do the same thing? And if we want to break it down into our language, well, this is kind of in our language. I'll let you guys read that for a second while I take a quick slurp of tea. This is what we're looking at. It's like, could we, as an organization and as an entity inside information security, how can we measure when we are being effective? How can we measure when we actually go in and unfortunately cause more problems than we actually fix? How do we stop ourselves from doing that? And while we're on the subject, yeah, duct tape does not fix everything. Please see the interesting one on the bottom right. But this is really what we're looking at. Do we have the discipline as an industry? And this is really a call to each and every one of us. Do we have the humility to actually take a step back, go to the business and actually go, hey, we haven't worked with you well. How can we be more effective? How can we talk to you in a language you understand? How can we talk to you in a way that we can work with you? Not that we can bash our will upon you, but how do we work more effectively with you? Help us understand, which is where this part of it comes in. Are we talking security? Are we talking safety? Or are we talking risk? And this is really the safety security discussion. When we talk security, we are talking to a human population and a business population that has only heard those words really for the last 40, 50, 60 years. In other words, this lifespan and this generation that we are dealing with now. Whereas if we have a safety conversation, you talk about OT, you talk about, instead of IT, you talk about the OT side of the world where you talk about safety first. Well, that's something that's ingrained into humanity, as the nice sharp tooth thing there is. 60,000 years ago, that thing was chasing us around all the damn cave systems. And if we didn't think about safety, we got eaten. We almost need to go back to that mentality and say, hey, how can we actually have conversations around safety, not security? And then the other argument is, quite honestly, there is no such thing as security. There isn't. It just doesn't exist. And next slide will go into that. There is simply the measurement of risk. So this is a little controversial and a little existential, but it's definitely something we want to think about. We can't secure anything totally. I will challenge anybody to have that conversation with, happily, actually. It'd be kind of a fun conversation. So then there's the argument in an existential world is, does a state of security actually exist? If it does, how the hell do we measure it? And do we measure it with risk? Or what is a good, accurate measurement of security? And if not, what the heck are we trying to talk to people about? Why are we talking about something abstract that we can't measure, we can't understand, and we can't necessarily quantify? So then we talk about it and we change it. We go, let's have the conversation around risk. Let's talk about business risk. Let's talk about organization and quantifying risk, which, let's face it, we've been able to do for thousands of years. That's the insurance business. Ever since somebody decided to set sail from, the Far East, the Middle East, or whatever, with an entire boatload of jute, we've had insurance. We've had risk management. We've not had security. So fundamentally, we need to change that, which then unfortunately brings an existential crisis from insecurity, because then we have to actually understand and realize, what are we? So with that little existential moment, we'll get back to some basic shit. Replace the blinky stuff. Well, this is where I get to annoy the French for a minute because it's fun to do. This is static defenses. I like this picture. This is probably one of the simpler ones. This is the Maginot Line. So we're going to talk about walls. Hey, what a topical thing to talk about. This is the Maginot Line for today's day and age. Yes, we can actually see the two wonderful pieces of equipment that sit in line in your data center that give you an entire false sense of security. Our risk mitigation, or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't work. We've been able to bypass them. Stop thinking that these things will stop everybody. This is the digital version of the Hadrian's Wall, the digital version of the Berlin Wall, the digital version of, the USA Mexico Wall. Speaking of that particular wall, let's have a conversation about walls. 4,100 years is how far back in history we can go to understand wall history. It, at best, is a temporary relief. It gives you the ability to sleep for a couple of nights in the misguided hope that you are safe, secure, and you have reduced your risk. It is, as it says, a willy-waving exercise that unfortunately will attract more attention. Walls don't work. Walls don't work in the physical world. We've proven that for 4,000 years. And walls don't work in the digital world because guess what? We don't have a perimeter anymore. So, as Mr. Einstein once upon a time said, let's stop doing the same thing over and over again, please. Well, a few more ideas on this one. For those of us that still are on the research side of the world, event log monitoring systems. Being able to produce an entire handful of those alerts, let alone tens and hundreds of thousands and millions of them that people have to look at, again, from a human standpoint, from an ML standpoint, we don't have the ability to handle all that stuff. Organizations don't have procedures and controls in place, most of them, or effective ones. I got a really good friend of mine that works at a financial institution here in Colorado that's done an amazing job of building out some just crazy, fantastic policies, procedures, and controls. I would love to have him talk to absolutely everybody out there because he knows how it works and he knows how it should be done. But unfortunately, so many companies are focused on chasing the blinky shit and not fixing the simple controls. The pen tests that we have to do, should do, must do on an annual basis. How many of us can put our hands on our hearts and say that the client has said, have at it? Not many. Most of us go, well, you can test this bit over here, but you're not allowed to touch this bit, and you better stay away from this bit. And by the way, if you scan this healthcare bit of the network, yeah, you'll kill everybody, so don't do it, please. That shit doesn't work. And then the auditors. I have a soft spot for auditors, because they are probably one of the most hated people on this planet, because they walk in and instantly it's a relationship that's antagonistic with the organization. It shouldn't be that way. We should welcome them in, say, help us understand our issues, and go from there, rather than bloody congratulating ourselves when they don't find the skeletons. Quit that shit. They're there to help. Let them. So, on top of that, obviously, we don't have good metrics. It's one of the biggest banes of our existence is how do we justify our existence? Well, we're not good at doing that either. And then we come back to the simple one. Assets. How many organizations out there can actually put a hand on their heart and say they know where all of their digital assets are? And that number is going to be counted on one hand at best. So, yeah, we just put a shot in the head of endpoint protection as well, just for the sheer hell of it. So those of you that are out there researching how to break endpoint detection, I got a way better, simpler way for you. Walk into the warehouse and find the ones that they completely forgot about. This, I apologize because it's small writing, but I wanted to get a lot of stuff on the page and rather than put it on 2 pages. So some blunt wrap-ups on this little bit of a section. You don't have a perimeter, it's not there. End of discussion. When the Alexa's talking to the coffee machine and it's answering your flipping email from you, you don't have a perimeter. End of discussion. You haven't done the basics, patches, SDLC, you share your code all over the place. Back to Mark, Mark Miller does a bunch of work for Sonatype, and you go take a look at the amount of stuff that they're monitoring and the amount of downloads they're monitoring from the shared data sources on the Java side and everything else, and how much of a mess that is. It's interesting to see. It's simple. We're always going to get in. We will always find a way in. There is no way of stopping us. Therefore, why don't we focus on what happens when somebody gets in as opposed to still trying to keep people out, which is where we get into this side of it, the preventative, the proactive, the deceptive side of the world, i.e. changing it back much more to a defensive type of strategy rather than, you know, the red offensive leaping over small walls. And this is kind of an interesting one. You know, the left-hand side, I've used this one a couple of times now over the years. This is basically how your network looks to us, or how, you know, as researchers, this is how we view the networks. Every single one of those ports, every single one of those IP addresses is a wonderful door that we can poke at. If we do our job properly and we change it to an asymmetric defensive discussion, and as researchers, rather than just breaking shit, we help organizations understand how to fix it, at that point, we can start putting some interesting booby traps behind those walls. We can start building deceptive technologies that help understand how those doors can be protected. And we start building up remediation and preventative stuff that, as it says, I don't mind if I put a grenade behind a couple of those walls and it blows up in somebody's face. So let's wrap it all up. You guys have listened to me rabbit on for like 40 or 50 minutes now. So let's see if we can wrap this one up and have a couple of questions. This was if anybody has a better picture of packet storms evolve or die, I really would love somebody to send it to me, find it to me, gift it, whatever. I had one of these t-shirts and I love this. This was where we were. This is how we did evolve. We evolved, but unfortunately we didn't necessarily evolve correctly. Again, part of those problems with only being an industry that's, you know, 40, 50, 60 years old, give or take a bit, our evolution cycles have not been long enough. This is what we need. We don't have this. We need more of this. We need the whole ability. We need diversity. We need to integrate. We need to be more encompassing. And this is kind of how I sum it up. I don't care your background. We need more people in this industry who are not geeks. We need people from all walks of life and all ages. Actually, you didn't put age in there. I apologize. You know, we got to have everybody. I saw something on LinkedIn the other day, and it was talking about the Somalian folks and the information security arena they have over there. I'm like, oh my God, that is fantastic. Bring them into the fold, for crying out loud. We need more diverse ideas, and we have to change. This isn't our problem. This is everybody's issue, and it's going to take all of us to fix the damn thing. We can't blame the C-suites. We can't blame the users, developers, anybody else. This is everybody. We have to fix this damn stuff together, because unfortunately, this is really where we are. It's as simple as that. We look at where tech is taking us. We look at where the crystal ball is going out on this. You know, it's not evolve or die. It's collaborate or die. I don't want us to evolve. I need us to collaborate, every single one of us. As researchers, when we're breaking things, we have to be thinking, how do we fix it, and how do we educate? How do we help people understand how to make it better? Because unfortunately, you know, the numbers and the statistics are not in our favor. The amount of apps, the billions of connected people, the amount of devices, and unfortunately, the shortfall in our industry. Simple. Breaking things is easy. We've got to fix the damn things now. We really have to take our time on helping people understand how to fix it, and not piecemeal fixing, not Band-Aid fixing. Fundamentally, how do we get down to the core of who we are, back to basics, and understand how we fix this? And I had a really nice MLK quote on there, and I found this one because, as it says, you know, I know this is a slightly different, but I'm taking a different tone. We have all come into this industry on different ships, but we're in the same boat. We need to stop the infighting. We need to stop the BS between us. We have to collaborate. because this is where we need to be. I, as an individual, will not solve this problem. We, together, have to do this to succeed effectively. So with that, final slide. Obviously, huge thanks to Casey, to all the folks, to Sam and everybody that put this on. Hopefully, folks have enjoyed this, and thanks to everybody listening. And as always, so long, and thanks for all the fish. So I will see if I can escape out of this. I have no clue what screen it's sharing, or no clue what the heck it's doing. And, oh, there we go. Hang on, new share. And that is the talk over. Do we have any questions? I haven't really been monitoring. I apologize. What do we got, guys?
I think we're taking questions on Twitter, so people have the hashtag It Takes a Crowd. And then we've also spun up a forum post. And there's also You're on Track 2, which is on YouTube. So there's a live kind of chat going there, but everything is mostly just praise for a lot of the points you made in the talk. So really appreciate a lot of what you're saying here. I think that a lot of these are human aspects that a lot of people don't think about, and I'm really happy that you're talking about them.
Thank you. No, appreciate it. This was good. Anybody got any questions or comments? There's some crackly stuff going on in the background. Who's crackly? So I will dig onto the Twitterverse and have conversations there. I'm actually got the iPad, just spun the iPad up to take a look. Oh, good grief, Twitter just blew up. All right. What do we have on this one? Sam, do you see anything I need to address or talk about on this one? I gotta say, yeah, this is good. This was fun. I mean, you guys are doing an absolutely fantastic job on this one. This is the one lovely thing I love about the Bug Crowd crew is, you've taken what was a really, really hard issue that we had to deal with. I remember dealing with, the likes of F5, the likes of Cisco, and a bunch of other companies, 10 years, 10, 15, or more than that, crikey, 15 years ago, and trying to do disclosures with them. Heck, PeopleSoft, for goodness sakes. The amount of disclosures I remember doing with PeopleSoft and having to deal with their lawyers and having to deal with those organizations. It was tough. I mean, it was nasty. It was really, really hard to have to try to actually talk to the right people, get the belief from those people that we actually, one, knew what the heck we were doing, and B, that we were trying to be ethical about it, and we were actually trying to do responsible disclosure. And I mean, let's face it, I'm kind of living proof of when that really doesn't go right, unfortunately, because of all the messing around with the aviation industry that I dealt with years ago. There were a number of us that spent 4 or 5 years trying to get that industry to listen, very unsuccessfully, no matter what we tried to do. And eventually we just hit the sod it button and disclosed, and, everything then blew up in our faces. It's we almost feel like we're facing the same thing these days with the transportation industry, not necessarily the shipping. There's a couple of good folks out there that are really starting to address that and starting to look at it, but definitely the trains are an absolute mess, and I really don't know how to fix that problem, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, we had a user in here talk about it was analogous to the hospital IT systems as well, and all hospital IT and things like that. Just how broken all of that is. Old software, and he said it was very analogous to the infrastructure and the software for trains and planes and automobiles. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and it's frustrating, because I think this is one of the interesting ones that I know over the years. I know I love my tasers and everything else, but what we need to try to help businesses to do, and the hospital's perfect example on this one. I mean, how many of us have walked into a healthcare facility, not only just looked around and went, eek, how much stuff is connected, but also if you're in there trying to help them, you're sitting down on behalf of that healthcare facility, looking at a vendor, and the vendor's like, oh, it has to be Windows XP, or it has to be, Windows 2003. And you're like, no, it doesn't. You haven't put the time in, the effort in, the management in. You're a lazy ass son of a bitch vendor who doesn't want to spend the time and the development to fix your shit. So you're going to say, if you touch it, it's unsupported. If you don't fix it, if you don't do anything with it, it's unsupported. If you breathe on the damn thing, it's unsupported. And this is how it has to be. We've got to throw the bullshit flag, and we've got to help industry throw that bullshit flag as well. And quite honestly, you know, from a purchasing power standpoint, we have to somehow or other give the tools back to the business so they can more effectively argue with the vendor to say, quit that. You know what? It's on 2003 because you don't want to spend the time developing for, you know, 20, whatever, 18, 19, 2020, or Windows 10 for crying out loud. You don't want to spend, I mean, you don't want to spend the time and effort to do this. This whole "it is the way it is, therefore suck it up" mentality, that especially healthcare and critical infrastructure is another one of those. You know, it is the way it is because it is. Well, bullshit. That cannot be an excuse anymore. That cannot be a reason to not fix the problem. Can we segment it? Yes. Can we separate it? Yes. Should we? Absolutely. Do we? Yeah, probably not. And to me, I think that's one of those things, you know, rather than coming in there and beating up on this stuff, we need to come in there and sit down and go, hey, let's get the vendor in, and you and I will help you, the business, taser the vendor until they actually believe that they can, and they will put the time and effort into fixing it. Now, the other caveat. Go on, sorry.
Oh no, let me ask you a question here. One of my good friends, Daniel Miesler, has been talking about some of this stuff in the fashion of the data that a lot of this talk is based around. Like, what is personal data, and why do we have this concept of personal data? Like, if you think of credit card numbers and even your social security number and passport data, obviously the health data is very personal, and I don't think we'll ever get around having to manage that securely. But how do you feel about abstracting away that there is no concept of this personal data that can really harm you in the long run, and if we approach the problem from that point of view?
I love that idea. And it's interesting because, so my daughter is 15 years old, and I had a conversation with her about what she considers good data. And her answer was very, very simple. She actually doesn't mind the advertising data. She doesn't mind targeted ads, and she doesn't mind a lot of that stuff, because to her, it actually helps her sift out the good stuff from the bad stuff. I'm like, that scares me, but I get it. To her, it gets personal when it crosses over, and you hit the nail on the head when it's, you know, when the healthcare company goes, hi, maybe you need to go on a diet because of what you're eating or what you're buying. It's like, screw you, you just crossed a line. And I think you're right. And plus also, I mean, let's face it, so much of what we consider personal these days is already all over the damn internet anyway. So the whole concept of a credit card security and everything else, we do need to take a step back from that. That's not, I mean, that data is already out there. It's been out there so many times. We keep issuing so many bloody cards. There's an argument to say it's already out there. It's not personal anymore. But you're right. The healthcare data is almost evolving. That is part of who I am as I go through life. But again, I don't know how the heck we secure that when you've got, you know, one vendor with 25 different subcontractors and third parties who have their hands in the pie as well. And let's face it, HIPAA has been ineffective for the best part of 15 years or so now. It's failed, as have all of the controls. So what do we change fundamentally there to make it more effective? You know, we say, let's secure that data. Well, show me how. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I don't have a good answer, I'll be honest. My answer, honestly, is we as an industry need to pair up with the business much more effectively. Rather than beating up on the business, we kind of need to be on the same side as the table as the business, looking at the vendors and suppliers and our own industry. You know, the 500 vendors that are going to be at RSA soon who are going to be like, oh, I can solve all of your problems. Well, bullshit. No, you can't. All right, I just realized it's getting to that time when I should shut the heck up and let our next esteemed guest go and figure out how to exit out of this thing gracefully. I will hit Twitter. I will hit the web channel-y things somehow or other, but it's been an absolute honor. Thank you very, very much for having me. Sam, huge shout out to you for fixing this and getting it all sorted, and obviously to the entire Bug crowd. So thank you very, very much, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much.